In a recent article in Nonprofit Quarterly, authors Kim Zwilly, who's the founder and managing editor of Feeding Cities Group, Maria Rosario Jackson, who's a senior advisor to the Strategic Learning Research and Evaluation Practice and the Arts and Culture Program at Kresge Foundation, and Seth Beatty, who is the senior program officer for Kresge's Art and Culture Foundation, said in an article that they wrote together, the article was called "Reckoning with a Reckoning: How Cultural Institutions Can Advance Equity." Increasingly, museums, theaters, and other cultural institutions across the U.S. face growing critique from communities they aim to serve. The questions are wide-ranging, including what art is being presented, by whom, and for what audience. Also being questioned are funding ecosystems that both public and private resources are directed by those resources toward large and Eurocentric institutions, while chronically underinvesting in organizations led by and serving people of color. Questions are being raised too about why art collections, artistic staffs, and endowments are often prioritized over direct service to community, and why regional and national marketing to affluent audiences often gets more attention than addressing economic and social distress in the art institution's own neighborhoods. There are countless arts organizations that directly invest in social and economic priorities in the communities they serve, often doing so with fewer resources and against the tide of underinvestment. We write this article as a call for artists and cultural organizations to do more in the name of community service, community justice, both by learning from the equity practices of others in the sector and by actively collaborating with and financially compensating these experts and catalysts. It's a potential path forward for the arts and culture sector, not only to institute meaningful change, but to serve as a bulwark in uncertain times. Being is not doing. Arts and cultural organizations must offer more than the mere existence to transform their communities. Arts and cultural organizations, and I might add artists, are uniquely positioned to build civic capacity for public discourse around controversial issues, cultural history. This recognition and call to action is not new. Indeed, it's in the very nature of the cultural organizations to help people understand their world. In 2001, 20 years ago, the American Association of Museums established a Museums and Community Initiative to challenge museums to become more active, visible players in the community life and to reinvigorate their civic role. So against that background, we're presenting today a topic of art and equity, how artists and businesses have engaged the process of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We have with us a fabulous panel of 5 who I'm going to ask to individually introduce themselves, give a little short, brief, concise introduction to who they are and where they're working and what they're doing. So we'll start on my screen to the left with Joyce Scott.
Hi, I'm Joyce J Scott. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I'm a visual and performing artist. I've been blessed to have won a sizable amount of awards, and the last one was the MacArthur, which really has tied me over through the last 5 years. I do a lot of beadwork, a lot of sculpture. I'm always working on social, not always, but mostly working on social and political issues. It's my very best voice, so that's why I use the arts for it. I also make music, and for years was an actress and a performer.
Lisa.
Let me unmute. Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. My name is Lisa Kim. I'm coming to you from the Hudson Valley of New York. And And just to give you a quick visual description of myself, I am a middle-aged Korean American woman with straight black shoulder-length hair. I am wearing a light cream top and pink glasses. And my background image is the atrium of the Ford Foundation headquarters building in New York City, which is where I have the privilege to work and serve as the inaugural director of the new Ford Foundation gallery in the building. So that's who I am.
And also the mother of a
3.5-year-old who is in school today, so there will be no disturbances for the next hour and a half. Except my dog.
Bigelow. You're muted.
Sorry.
There you go.
I'm Rob Bigelow. I am the Executive Director and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. We are in Bentonville, Arkansas, someplace that's maybe unexpected. We are a newer institution. We are just rounding out our 10th year anniversary. And when we think about American art, we are very broadly based about what that means. So it doesn't mean you have to be born in America or hold passport or citizenship.
Robin Robinson.
Good morning from sunny California. I'm Robin Robinson. I come from a politics and art activism background, which led me into a career in television where I was an Emmy-winning anchor and reporter and covered arts, which included interesting and very intimate relationship with the artist known as Prince. That boosted my career into the art community. I ran for lieutenant governor on an arts platform and wound up as art director at MSP International Airport, which led me to create my own firm, 555, which is a consulting firm that does community and large scale consulting with local and national artists. Looking to create emotional equity in communities for the community's need and branding identity and space for the business partner.
And Rose Simpson.
Good morning, everyone. I'm joining here from Santa Clara Pueblo in northern New Mexico, where I live in my ancestral homelands, and I work. I have a studio and a shop. I have a 4-year-old daughter. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design for a master's in ceramics, and then on to the Institute of American Indian Arts for a second master's in creative nonfiction. Then I went to school for automotive science in basic classic car customization. And I currently use all of these different sort of facets to talk about my experience as an Indigenous person in a post-colonial context, and also about sort of through my sculpture and my installation and my performance and my custom car that is now showing, has just finished a museum show, that I hope to talk about the future of our combined humanity in something that's starting to look like a post-apocalyptic sphere. And so I look forward to see how navigating all these different medias can really bring really integral and important conversations about the future of humanity as a whole together.
Rose was also the lead singer in a rock group called Chocolate Helicopter years ago.
Long time ago.
Well, thank you all for your introductions. One thing, when we put together this panel, we had no idea what connections would be made between the panelists. And just before all the participants joined us, we had a little conversation. And I'm not sure that there isn't one who has some connection to the other. In fact, maybe more. So it's a small world indeed. So to the topic of art and equity. The first question is very general. I'd like each of you to give a bit of a response to it. What does inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility mean to you, and why are they important? And I'm going to start with Rod, since in his title, which is an unusual one, he is the Chief Diversity and Equity Officer at Crystal Bridges.
I love being the first person in front of this very important panel to have this comment. If for us, we think about DEAI for short in a way that we've gone through very much an evolution at the museum of thinking about what the importance is. It's all about relevance in our world. It's all about continuing to serve and respond to our community and be reflective of our communities. I think when I think about the DEAI space, it is really about life experience and lived histories. And so it is your individual experience in your lifetime, plus those that have come before you, generations before. And you can talk about all the specifics about race and ethnicity and geography and gender and on and on and on. But I think we think about it much more holistically and have also moved into a space that is about belonging, and that the institution is a place that is in a trajectory of becoming a place of belonging for everyone. And that is work to be done. We are a long way away from that. That is an objective. We also have, we've made commitments to move toward being an anti-racist institution. And so we've moved beyond sort of the traditional conversation about DEAI and what does it mean to be an anti-racist institution, and how do we act appropriately and effectively and take a position in regard to this space. So that's what it generally means to me, but it's about existence for us as an institution.
I need to back up, and I would be remiss if I had not allowed my director and CEO to introduce himself. Andy?
That's all right. I'm mostly here to listen, because it is such a, when Sandy talked about doing this, okay, so let me back up. I'm Andy Mouse, Director and CEO of Plains Art Museum. We talked about doing this program, and when we started thinking about people gathering an important group of thinkers on this topic, people started agreeing, and I was like, this is amazing, this group of people. I'm just so honored that Lisa, Rod, Rose, Robin, and Joyce all agreed to share with us a little bit of time today. So I'm skipping, like, people know me, it's fine here. I'm the director of the museum, but mostly I just wanted to extend just a gratitude for a bit of time from these wonderful people today. So thank you. I might interject a few times, but Sandy's going to moderate.
Oh, we can expect him to interject.
It's what I do.
Yeah. Joyce, your thoughts on IDEA or DEI within your, go.
Well, my idea is that's the way I just like to have a life. I think human beings are really wonky, and I don't expect people not to have their personal prejudices or wants and dislikes. That's not what I'm about. I like the equity part, though. I don't care if you like me or dislike me so much. I just want to be able to move through life and through my artwork and others like me with the feeling that I will not be attacked, killed, maimed, robbed because of my ethnicity or my gender. My voice is in the artwork. I don't have an ability to be a politician or a great preacher, or stand on soapboxes. I got bad knees. The way that I talk about what is important to me is through my art. And if I'm not in an arena that's equal, then I won't get heard. So it's up to me, I believe, to always place myself in a position with the help of those who can do that, so that even the things that are startling and sad and devastating that I have to talk about should be presented. And I, as an African-American woman in her 70s, I believe that I've worked long enough to make that happen. So I don't want ageism to be another part of it, or the belief that the materials that I use, because I've jumped the broom between the crafts and fine arts, is not of equal import. That means that institutions and those that support institutions have to wake up. I didn't put the F word in there, but I wanted to. Because in this time of great turmoil, real social activism is for institutions that show, I think, the arts and those artists who work that way. I don't think artists should do anything but what they want to work on. But for those of us who want to stand up tall in that way, we have to do it. Because we're not only citizens of the arts, we're citizens of the actual world. And so I believe I must be responsible for my community and to my community, not only my community of artists, but the community in which I live in. And I demand that from other institutions. And I mean, who am I to demand it? Well, my taxes help to pay for it. And the images that you show that represent everyone, including me, I think should have a 365-degree base where the ugliness and the beauty should both be shown. And I should have the opportunity to be a part of that.
Thank you. Lisa.
I will go right to the chase. Joyce, I will support your use of the F-bomb whenever you want to use it. Let's say DEIA to me is power and authorship, right? It is the story and it is the unmaking and the unlearning of the story that we have been told about this nation and the world, who we are, how we were founded, and what our future is, right? So how do we unlearn what we have inherited? How do we unlearn the white supremacy and the kind of the colonial destruction that has built this nation and culture and how we have accepted it? I come from a perspective personally of being an immigrant. My family and I immigrated here when I was 4 years old. And so I grew my entire childhood, I was told to become American. So from age 4, I'm learning how to become American. And who are my examples but on pop culture, on television, and the images that I see, the language. I am told to suppress my native culture and learn to be American. And even for me now, as a 40-something-year-old, I have to unlearn what I taught myself about being American, about the shame that I felt about being an Asian American, how I had to become white to become accepted, how I had to find integration and assimilation in industries of in the commercial art world, in real estate where I work for a nanosecond. You know, to work at the Ford Foundation for me now is a dream, and it's quite liberating to understand and accept and to live at a time when we are all talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how integral it is for humanity. We need to rewrite the script and give power to the voices of the people to be their own authors of their stories so that we can all understand, accept, and appreciate each other's stories. It's been a one-sided, one-note story for way too long, and that's what we're doing, is the unlearning.
Rose, Lisa used the word humanity, and so did you. Your thoughts?
I'm gonna second the use of the F-bomb.
You first.
I know how this meeting is going to end. It may be a chorus.
1, 2, 3, let's go. So when I think about the words diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially when we're in the context of an institution or the institution, you know, because of my own experiences and understanding, you know, the colonial history of this country, I'm always thinking about diversity to who, equity to who, and inclusion in what, and from whose perspective. Because we have diversity, we have equity, and we have inclusion in spaces that are not colonized by white supremacist patriarchy. And all of this is based on, like, what we're trying to do is change white supremacist patriarchal institutions that come from European concepts of what is success, what is inclusion, where do you, you know, what is the goal in life? What is the value system that we're holding is still very rooted in white supremacy and colonial constructs. And so if the goal is to find approval through white male supremacy, basically is what it comes down to, then we're still playing the game. And so what I'm always asking is, how do we, for myself, enter into those spaces if we're still, wanting to play the game? Because we don't have to, there are other options. And I understand that I'm saying this from a place of privilege. And my privilege is that I am still an Indigenous person who lives on my ancestral homelands, who still knows how to grow my own food. And that is basically an immense privilege, to be able to choose to play or not to play. And not many people have that decision or that choice. And so what I think about is, how do we build conversation with these institutions that have self-labeled as the concept of success, or making it, or entering into what are we trying to be included into? And so I really, I feel like my grandmother was a philosopher, and she spoke a lot about, why would we even have the conversation with the colonizer? And it's because we need to change. We need to talk about what hurt, how we flip that script, and how we, if we learn to speak that language, then we can enter into those spaces and change them from within. But that's also a decision. I think, like Joyce said, it's a decision to do that work. And we can speak in all kinds of different ways. But for me, I can't not see the museum itself, and even educational institutions, as all sort of fingers of white supremacy. And how do we deconstruct what the museum is to begin with, is kind of how I'm trying to sort of infiltrate and deconstruct from within, is how do we build those conversations of how do we change what that means by how we act in those spaces, and how we deconstruct and question every aspect of it, from the white walls to the preconceived notions of what community outreach looks like, and access, and all of those things. So I'm always trying to back it up all the way to the very beginning, to see how we can, rebuild an entirely new foundation that has different value systems. What are our values, and what are we trying to do, and how are we still rooting ourselves in places of superiority by even having this conversation?
Thank you. Robin.
Thanks, Sandy. I think the word insert and infiltrate, like Rose said, is something that I've kind of grown up with kind of practicing all my life. I grew up in a household that was really very heavily involved in Chicago politics on many fronts. And when you grow up as a kid in the 60s, and your house is filled with Black Panthers, Nation of Islam, artists like Oscar Brown Jr., people that have distinct ideas and thoughts about what's happening in the world and what's going on around you, you just can't help but be influenced. I went to school with kids whose parents were on the legal team for the Chicago 7 during the '68 convention. So it's a lot of those things that influence my idea that sometimes you have to subvert from within. You have to learn how to be in the system and learn how to make change within the system, because you can't do it all at once. There's things that you have to learn, and there's things that I learned growing up with Southern women that taught you a lot about being an iron fist in a velvet glove, by learning how to appeal to people in ways that they don't even realize that they are agreeing to what you want them to do. So it's all those different things that I think I used in my career that kind of led me to, when I got to the airport, to really understand what inclusion and diversity and equity really means. It means from the roots of everything from the brick and the ground up, that you have to include people who are able to make creative decisions, that can work with various people and have open minds to what it needs to feed a community spiritually and economically as well, so people can see themselves in what you're doing. It's no longer enough when you say public art that you can put a Snoopy statue in front of something and walk away from it. It just doesn't happen. But at the same time, where more people are in need of art, in need of that conversation, in need of that spiritual connection, we are not taking care of the people who really make that change happen. So I got to see it from a reporter's point of view of watching what was happening in the community with artists, a very rich arts community in the Twin Cities, but also got to see from the artist's point of view that for all the acclaim for the art, they weren't allowed in the institutions, that were in their neighborhoods, that were in the communities, and asked to do many things in the communities for very little recompense, and doing anything that really feeds them, feeds their families. Oftentimes I had to say, you know, if there was a reception that they wanted to have at the airport, it's like, well, you know, in order for us to have this reception, we have to pay people for their time. It's not like they live on clouds and float down for 3 or 4 hours to entertain you. So it's really important that you look at diversity and equity and inclusion on many different fronts. You know, when you have people, there are 33,000 people going through your building every single day, you're also talking about the equity of people who need to be able to hear and see and be able to feel what is happening in this building. So you're looking at the politics of it, the politics of inclusion for people that have disabilities, the politics of inclusion that are being left out of institutions, and you have the politics of inclusion of communities and bringing them into the institution so they don't feel walled off, so that businesses are not just these brick walls that they are just constantly trying to sandblast graffiti off of. Graffiti means that we are here. And all they're trying to do is get the people who are on the other side of that wall to recognize that. So I believe from start to finish that you have to be a part and insert yourself into these institutions to get the message inside that that institution, that they need to break that invisible brick wall down with the community. Bring in local artists to help you create a problem solve in that community and let them know that that's a safe space for those people. To talk to the people in the community who remember the history of a community and how it used to be and where it's going now and where they see themselves in that community and that future, and building all of that for equity in a very well-rounded way, and changing the culture inside the building to bring it outside and be a part of the community around it, and letting the people outside come in and feel ownership, that emotional equity, as well as refeeding the infrastructure, local, community, state.
Thank you. One of the common denominators between the 5 of you was the personal. And there's a James Joyce quote that says, paraphrasing, from the particular we access the universal. And I think that's what's happening here in this conversation, that your particular experiences, or as Rod said, the lived histories of each of us are giving more full voice to this issue of art and equity. So by mid-March of 2020, for all intents and purposes, the entire world was infected with COVID-19. During the past 12 months, millions and millions of people globally have sought respite, hope, rejuvenation, inspiration, diversion, refuge, personal engagement, and some semblance of human connection through some form of creativity. And millions of people have not. From your perspective, how has the process of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility in the arts been affected over the last 12 months by the pandemic?
I don't know if I think it's a combination of the pandemic, of what was happening politically, and the Black Lives Matter. I think it's a combination of all of those, because every time I'm online, I see that another African American or someone of African descent here or in Europe are being employed as curators or entering what we're talking about, the inside of institutions, in a different way. You also see that many Black artists are being sought after by the, in quotes, top galleries, and are selling their artwork for a lot of money, and some of the work is really completely representative of the Black experience, be it portraiture or whatever. I think the effect is, see, I think this whole thing is a problem of spirit and the inside of humanity, not mankind, but humanity. I think we can say anything we want about the institutions and about how you have to go in, and we all go in and try to make a difference, and do make a difference. Because these aren't the institutions that existed 10 years ago. They are different. However, people have to want to change. They have to want to see the truth about life and how it's better when we're all working together. And so in that regard, I really do believe that the internal structure of the museum has to, or institutions have to employ, and when we talk about diverse, truly diverse employees, and they must be listened to. And then so what that'll do is, I mean, when you look at anything, it'll be different. I mean, I know that's what we've been saying, but that to me is the core. I mean, I can put up some really crappy artwork. Well, it's a crappy artwork done by a Black person. That's true equality, when everybody can put up crappy work. Do you understand what I mean? So I don't even know how to get close to some of these things, because it's so deeply rooted in how we view ourselves. I have an art godson who told me it's going to get so bad that it'll get better, because people will have no choice in the decisions that they make if they wish to live. So it might get to be that for institutions as well. They'll have no choice but to truly diversify, or they won't exist in a meaningful way, and then they won't get funded.
I think it's been really interesting to watch from a technological standpoint and from a humanitarian standpoint as well, of what's been going on since the pandemic. I think for people that work in public art, like myself, I mean, I think a fundamental change on how we interact with art is going to happen. I think there's going to be an innate distancing of people from actually interacting with art. I think that there has been a real eye-opener for institutions as well, because the advent of virtual reality is really going to pull away from that interactive experience, going back to an institution as well. So it's going to have to reinvent itself just because of a technological standpoint. But what I've also found is that it's forcing the institution to have to reckon with itself and its history, and really have to listen to what is happening in the public, and listening to the community as to what is going on. And so it's really making a fundamental shift in how museums are going to have to work, and how it presents itself to the public, and how the public also interacts with it. I'm not being very clear on what I'm trying to say, but because I'm thinking too much at the same time. But what I did notice is really the most fascinating thing is that despite the fact the pandemic closed places down, slowed down money getting to artists really banded together and really showed a collective spirit.
Yeah.
In really working to heal the community, heal themselves during this time, that really putting collective forces together and working together and problem solve has really brought a lot of artists in the community together in a very healthy and a very intimate way. And I don't think that these are things that even a panel discussion like this, where it is the 8 of us and roughly 30 people in the audience, it brings a more intimate conversation together. That's something that a museum where many people feel that they have a barrier, that they don't feel included and don't feel invited into. They would not go to a museum to see this, but they would gladly show up for a Zoom conference. It's going to change really fundamentally how museums listen to the community around them and interact with the community around them.
Rod?
Yeah, no, I am humbled again from the conversation, and just to riff on Robin, I think for us, and I'm representing this institution here, and I am also representing the white supremacist histories of museums and of myself. So I have to be honest and transparent with that. I think about the impact from sort of what Brian Stevens says, proximity. I think for the first time, institutions are finally sort of taking real looks at what they do, and they're actually getting into communities and having conversations, and this is all a power structure as well. So we possessed all the power for centuries and beyond, and we continue to possess that power with funding and collections and programs. And then oftentimes in history, institutions have come in as sort of this perceived white savior and expect to go into a community and help and support and fix. And I think because of COVID for one degree, but also, you know, all the issues around race and Black Lives Matter, there is a real reckoning with what does that mean? How is that really translated into something that's meaningful, much different than it has before. So I think for us, it has meant we have listened far more than we've ever listened before. And it is about not taking action. It's about listening, and then looking internally first. Because if we can't have an internal organization, and that is, to Robin's point, and to Joyce's point, that's staffing, and that's power structures within organizations, and hierarchies, and funding, and all of that has to be reckoned with. And it is really going down to the very foundation of our organization. And we don't have a legacy of 100 years, but we carry all that legacy of museums and that environment forward. So when we think about belonging, we've got to strip everything down to the beginning and start over, because there are too many legacies that exist that exclude. And so just from the very fundamental concept of starting over is I think where lots of institutions are at the moment, and kind of looking and listening. And I think that's where we are.
May I say something? For me,
Who's going to stop you?
because there was, it won't be you good looking.
Yeah.
This is the elephant in the room, and I'm fat, and I don't mean it's me. I am trying not to say white people have to wake up, but that's what I really am thinking. When they stormed the Capitol, I was not shocked. I was a bit surprised, because Black people have been telling you this for the whole time. We've been talking to you about institutions and how not porous they are, how they represent an echelon of art, even if it's Black art, that isn't a representative of all the people who want to come in and see the museum. And this goes, of course, now much deeper to people examining reasons why they are in the institutions, why they wish to present what they present, and how they can change things that will be better for everyone. It's not just that it's better for Black people or people of color to come in, the BIPOC nation. It's so everyone has this glorious wealth that art inhabits. it is such a freeing, most abundant feeling to have. Why wouldn't we share it? And not only folks who are wealthy or folks who are white or folks who do medieval work should be seen. And one knows it, and then we all go back to our own place and think, yeah, but my stuff is really good, right? So watch it. No. I think we have to think about us all. If anything that the pandemic has taught me is that everybody gonna get it. That's Ebonics. Everybody gonna get it. Everybody gonna get sick. Nobody's gonna have food. So we must see the truth in this stuff. And I see, and then I won't say it again, that a lot of the onus right now is for white people to step up and do the heavy, incredibly heavy work. And then you'll be free too. My mom used to say, you can't be free when your foot is on someone's neck, and we know what that means now, but that was an old saying, because the person you're standing on can't move, but hey, neither can you. I'm in trouble now.
No, Joyce, you're not.
No.
You're not in trouble at all, Joyce.
That's what this is about.
That is what this is about. I think what's interesting, and if I could add one thing, there could be a transition to Rose's point about fundamental values of a museum and where we are, rethinking about institutions. And this, I think, is a lesson that could be learned outside of museums. So no matter what kind of institution it is, rethinking from a museum that is primarily about objects to being one that is primarily about people, because every object is a collection of narrative of a person, people, places, and time, right? Even if it's a work of formal minimalism, whatever, there's still the creator, the person, the ideology, the place, the circumstance that it was made. So I think this like fundamental rethinking of a museum being about objects, which I'm not sure that they ever were. I think that they were always about people, and you're right to say that there were a lot of people excluded from those narratives. And I think what Rod is saying is we're I think institutionally finally at this place where we're like, okay, we see that. Now we have to do, to your point, the heavy work of changing. But I think that thinking about the institution and those values, like Rose had this way of like just putting it down to the fundamental, just rethink what you're doing. That's a lesson that could be learned, I think, outside of museums. I think it's starting to be felt within the museum structures, but maybe, and I don't mean to say the work is done. I just mean it's the very beginning of it.
Rose?
I think there's a fundamental shift in how museums are thinking about their role in society, and that's critical right now. Right, as the arbiter of objects that tell the human story, the perspective of how that story's been told, right? Walking through the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you kind of get through this sort of there's an othering that happens in museums, the way that the works are partitioned. Art becomes gross human curiosity about other people told through their objects of history, and they're held in different regard than the works in the old masters' wings. I mean, just by calling them the old masters, right? But there's a whole deconstructing of art history that has to happen as well within museums, and the value placement of, let's say, ethnographic work versus what's considered high art, or Joyce brought up craft art, right? And so the way that we have compartmentalized art within institutions, that needs to be reworked as well. And then also who you serve. If museums were at one point serving the elite to kind of really bolster everybody's idea of what culture is, and you're talking to the same kind of cross-section of society, now it's a different story. Who do you serve? And museums as public institutions means you serve the public. And who is your public? Your public is diverse. Your public wants to learn from these objects. Your public wants to be in discourse. Your public needs engagement. Your public needs access, right? And access on multiple levels, right? I cringe and I cry at so many stories that I hear about children, the group of Black kids who went to the MFA in Boston, and the security guards treated them with such disrespect and disdain. And that sets up this immediate barrier. And that's just one tiny example, right? It happens over and over and over again. So how do we break down those barriers? How do children who didn't grow up with art, who've never stepped into an art museum, understand that the museum is for them? How do they feel welcomed, right? The pros and cons of the pandemic and the Zoom land are, it's really great that we, and from disparate parts of this country, can all join together, and this audience can join in, and this will be recorded and people will see it, but only people who want to see it will see it, right? How do we get people who really need to hear this conversation, who need to be the problem solvers with us, hear this conversation as well, to know that we are on their side too, that we need to hear their voices, to know that they are welcome to tune into something like this, that they are welcome. What happens to those who don't have access to the internet, right? You don't have computers, right? There's a great disparity in who has high-speed internet access, who has devices to tune into school or classrooms or art events. So while art can be more accessible in this format, there still are barriers. So we need to pay attention to all of the aspects holistically of how a community can be engaged. I think I spoke about 10 different things there, but that was my mind going.
No, I
to all
totally
of
get
your
what
comments.
you're saying. I so get what you're saying, Lisa, because I think working in the Twin Cities during the pandemic and during the whole George Floyd murder has given a wonderful opportunity of sorts to really focus on the fact that ontological design that people are living in the parallel with the artwork around them, people that are experiencing what is on the street, what is happening. When you see those protest art boards that are on people's buildings, when you see them line the street, this is the communication that people have been missing because they have not felt access to those institutions. This is also the communication that's felt when people are given a project and you go into a community and say you're going to have a large scale artwork that's going to be in it, and the RFP is such legalese that it turns an artist off. They can't read it. They walk away from it because they don't feel included in it. The language excludes them from even having the opportunity to participate in building something in their own community. So it's been a really important time because the pandemic has forced people to really pay attention to what's happening in the world around them and what they're seeing reflected, especially in communities like the Twin Cities. They're seeing and hearing from artists and people that they respect in their own communities. They're seeing artists that have been in museums, that are being acquired by museums, going back to the street to teach young people to express themselves creatively, politically, reflect their communities. So this is the work that I'm doing right now in the Twin Cities, is trying to work with different folks in the community that are in the central neighborhood, just within blocks of where George Floyd was killed, to create things that are in the community that reflect social justice, and also speak to those art institutions like the College of Art and Design, which is right down the street as well, to bring in students, to bring in kids from the Boys and Girls Club, to work with organizations like Streeter Homes, which is a luxury home builder that has decided to come back into the community and address community needs, including art from the start of whatever we do, so that they are the ones that are also the ombudsmen for the community and what should be done, and including the community and what change is being made. So people want to see art that represents them in real time. What's happening in their lives parallels what's happening with the art that they're seeing. They want to be included, and it's also these institutions that I work with. I've been on boards. I was a board chair of the Museum of American Art, Minnesota Museum of American Art, is listening. Laura Josephus is the curator there, just knowing that it's the time to listen to the artists in the community, compensate them for sharing their wisdom.
Rose? Rose? Rose, the Native American community across the U.S. has been, as with the African American community and the Black community, been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. How has that affected your work or your participation in your Pueblo?
I mean, when you only have so many people who are culture bearers left and they are dying or they could die, and when they die, that's it. There's no more of that information that's vital. And it really puts genocide, you could smell it really strong during that time. And so, you know, for myself, it put a lot of things into context. It's like, why are we making work? And why are we doing this, waking up every day and choosing to you know, build this conversation and this dialogue? And I think, you know, I had a few months where I got a break for the first time. I worked every single day for a long time, and I got a break where I got to walk in the hills and think about what we're doing and really be with myself and my daughter, who is no longer in school, and all the things. And what I like about, you know, what Joyce was saying and what Robin's saying and Lisa's saying is that art in itself is, it can be, it's not often, you know, there's a lot of you know, things that don't inspire me in that way, but it can be a direct line to our vulnerability. And I think if anything, COVID has brought up a lot of our vulnerability, feelings of fear, feelings of loss, feelings of hopelessness, feelings of betrayal, feelings of all kinds of hard feelings. And I think all of those hard feelings have been incredibly vital to, hold on one second. No, go sit in the room. Thank you. Have a little girl. That work that we're doing in our creative processes have to reach those hard places in each other. And if we're going to make like change, we have to sort of mine those hard conversations and those vulnerable places in all of us. And how do we, you know, create spaces for those emotional processes with our artwork, you know, with our museums, and creating spaces where people walk into a room and they just go, oh, and they feel all the things that we've been needing to feel, because I think we can only hurt each other when we're in a space of denial, denying of something, you know? And so if we can get out of denial, all of it. And a lot of it is accountability. A lot of it is responsibility. A lot of it is heartbreak. There's a hell of a lot of fear, and there's a shit ton of rage. That all needs to be looked at really directly. And if we can use our creative processes to mine into the core of that, and if we didn't see like Black Lives Matter and was vital because it started to say enough, because we got to sit with ourselves and sit in our shit long enough to be like, enough, no more. Because when we go, we never stop and think, and we never stop and reflect, and we never stop and sit in those really, really feelings of fear and rage that we've been in denial of. Or even our heartlessness, our denied heartlessness, the fact that we could hurt someone else and not even think twice about it. And no one is exempt from this work. No one, you know, but if we can all, you know, sort of use our tools, our creative processes, our accesses, our means of communication, because all this is communication. How do we communicate? To who do we communicate? And why, right? Who are we talking to? What are we trying to say? And to what end? To what end, right? So if we can learn to use the tools at our disposal to truly communicate, not just up here, but push it down into here where it really, really feels hard. And those hard conversations come from, and we can say really scary things, and we can hear really hard things about ourselves, and be able to speak really scary truths about our boundaries to others. And I think if we don't use our platforms and our privileges to do that, then why?
Fear
Thanks,
is
Rose.
the mind killer. Definitely, Rose.
Well, you know, I feel everything we feel, we're meant to feel. It's how we get out of it. I'm completely with you. Rose, I wanted to say something about something that was said earlier when the person was talking about, well, what happens when kids in the public don't have access to art? Well, we all have access to art, especially in communities that are troubled. It's the way you dress, it's the food you eat, it's the things that I hear out on the street. It's not only the music that's played, it's you messing with cars. It's you making your own jewelry business. It's me talking trash to whoever. These things exist within us and within our communities already. Now, do the institutions see the import and the quality of those things? I remember in the 60s and 70s that when these exact same conversations came up, then museums really started to have concerts and fashion shows and all kinds of classes within the museums and in art centers, things that were not done so easily before, because they not only had people running into the doors, but they realized that when folks look at Mona Lisa and stuff, and she's got that little smile and everything, they be doing like, Mona, don't be moaning on me. You the one, set me free. I mean, all of a sudden that stuff came out. So the museum, with its, it already exists for us to do that. Folks have to not only, what you were talking about, Rose, do this when you're at institution, you got to go home and do that. We all have to go home and do it. We all have to go home and do it within our communities. Robin's saying it. We're all saying it. But now we have to do it. And when you talk about losing the elders within your community, my mother was an elder within the community, and she was a nationally known textile artist. And the people still come and tell me about what they so. Oh, I remember Liz and her homemade wine and the you know, she spits some wisdom. She'd be dropping stuff. I would like to have some of this happen within my own lifetime. I intend to live for a very long time, but I would like it to happen now. And so I'm trying not just to talk about it. I do it within my artwork. And I think we all are talking about how we in some way are mentors or sisters and brothers. I'm Auntie Joyce, Auntie something to someone else. And institutions can be the same thing. And I have to applaud certain institutions, because when we talk about making art and artists being responsible and institutions being responsible, institutions gave away food. That's real social. That's a real social concept. When you present yourself as something other than this halcyon place for the visual arts.
So we have two representatives of institutions.
Sandy, can I just say something real quick?
Sure.
I just want to say, Joyce, it seems that it comes to me that every 20 years, institutions are going to be forced with kicking a door down. Right now is the 52nd or 53rd anniversary of Afro-Cobra and the Black Arts Movement being born from the Detroit riots. Hip hop, punk, both kicked down the institutional doors in the 80s because they said, you know what, you don't open the doors, we DIY it, we're doing it ourselves. And then the institutions were forced to deal with it as a creative force 20 years later. Now, 20 years later, we are ready for this new revolution to kick the door down open in the institutions. So, our lifetime.
Okay, Rod, you've got doors on your institution. The Crystal Bridges has been called one of the most woke museums in America. Can you expand on what you're doing to have earned that reference?
I'm just going to say, no, we're not. And I don't even think that's a reference that is worth having a conversation about, to be perfectly honest. I think that we are so far behind where we need to be. But we are committed to making difference and change. I think one thing I just want to comment on the last part of the conversation, which was there's an incredible amount of pressure on artists to perform and reflect and represent and change and drive institutional change. And I'm not sure that all of that is fair, for one. So we've got to give space to artists to do their thing. And that's just one thing. As an institution, we can't just move to a community and say, fix this for us, or ask an artist or a group of artists to fix it for us. So, I think we were very humbled by the pandemic and all of the issues of the last year. So we did things like provide food. We have changed we haven't taken museum out of our titles yet, but we are a community center and want to move into that community centric space, which means sharing the space. It means looking at fundamental needs. It means letting people occupy the space and own the space. And I think the interesting is that the language that I'm using is very much the same as many institutions have used for decades past. And we have to actually reconcile with how is that different now? And the words that you are all saying and the energy and passion and emotion and responsibility that we carry is all exactly what we're talking about. That's what we need to advocate for. That's what we need to bring alive, and that's what we need to facilitate and fund. And I think we'll never, when we talk about, the buzzword being an anti-racist institution, I'm not sure we'll ever get there. I think there's lots of people that have great hope in that, but I think there's an ever-evolving role for institutions that is required to be relevant and to exist. To Joyce's point, we won't exist if we can't change. That's the honest answer in my book.
See, I think you'll exist, and I think you'll be doing the same old shite. That's what I think. And I think that the very population that people keep saying they want to be part of just kind of won't. But I also wanted to say something about racism as I see it and define it. I think about like the physics of racism. You got people who are like totally racist, and then you got people on the other side who don't have a racist bone in their body, but most of us live somewhere in the middle. And that's the truth that I keep trying to work through. I don't think anybody will ever be, I don't think our society will ever be completely racist. We're human. I think, though, the equality that I speak to talks about them not being the ones who are ruling everything and having all the power and all the money. And I don't think they do, but enough of them do. And enough of us are living off the largesse that was created in that system that is very hard to separate oneself from. I don't think my job is so much to worry about racist or those. I have to, but my job is to not be it. My job is to make sure that those around me that I can help to influence know why that's not the thing to do. Or I'll spend all my time worrying about some guy with a MAGA hat on and horns. And horns, y'all.
Lisa, when we first talked, you told me how the Ford Foundation's building made a significant change in its architecture and how that affected the collection and your evaluation of the collection, and how that has affected, in turn, your approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you kind of go through that process again?
Sure. Sandy, I'll speak briefly about that because it seems such a small part of the heart of where this conversation is going. And but I will comply and answer your question. The Ford Foundation building, which you see behind me in this background, was built in 1967, the height of the Mad Men era, right? And so think about what the Ford Foundation is. It's philanthropy, and the institution of philanthropy is in and of itself an elitist endeavor, right? It was capitalism that got us these funds and capitalism that built this building. And in the 60s, those in leadership and those who built this building were rich old white men, right? And the building was built for them. The building was built with hierarchy in mind. Kevin Roche, who's a phenomenal architect, said that it should be intimidating to go meet the president of the Ford Foundation. So the president's office had the entire the south wing of the 10th floor, excuse me. So you had to pass by 3 secretary stations to meet the president of the Ford Foundation. It's a different era, right? The beautiful atrium that you see in this picture, there were 400 private offices, larger than 1-bedroom apartments in New York City, that faced and looked down on the atrium. So only the executives in the building had access to sunlight and to the green, the garden, to the garden view. Yeah. And there was, everything was basically built for, in excess, right? Leather and dark wood and brass and custom. It was very luxurious, and they had the funds to do that. So here we are, fast forward to 2013, Darren Walker becomes president of the Ford Foundation, and the Department of Buildings calls him and says, your building is just doesn't meet city code and you need to come into code compliance by 2019. Code compliance meant asbestos abatement and adding a sprinkler system and becoming ADA compliant. With that directive, this changing the building became a larger opportunity for Darren and the board to consider how we not just come up to building code to be structurally compliant, but how can the building and the architecture become evolve and change and speak to who we are today as an organization and how the world operates and how we want to work, and how can the architecture be reflective and responsive to our core values as an institution, right? So a couple of the quick changes, and there's some great articles in Architectural Digest and the New York Times about the building renovation. So the main design integrity of the building remains, but Gensler, who's the firm who did the building renewal, as we call it, all 400 private offices have been ripped out. So the window space is now is corridor for all of the employees, so we all have access to light. The president took a much smaller office. He gave up all of the the trappings of the 3 secretary stations to get to his office. There is literally transparency in the building. You can see across. You can always see who Darren is meeting with. I mean, when Darren met with Colin Kaepernick, we were all like, "Oh my God, we need to meet him." There's literal transparency in the building. We took a smaller footprint in the building. The Ford Foundation building is no longer just the Ford Foundation headquarters. We are the Ford Foundation Center for Social Justice. We have 3 like-minded organizations who are tenants in the building. All of our convening and meeting spaces are open to the nonprofit sector and to our grantee community to come in and use for meeting spaces. I jokingly call the building the Grand Central Station of social justice, because on any given day, you could have 20 different meetings happening within the building. With the change in the building, that opened up an opportunity for us to create an art gallery. The art gallery is intended to be a free public space where people can come in. Prior to the building renovation, you would not step into this building if you didn't have an appointment to be here, right? It's a fortress-like building, stone, steel, and glass, not welcoming. And now we're telling people, come in, come sit and enjoy the garden atrium, come in and interact with art, come in and see the exhibitions that we have. You are welcome in the building. And then also the collection. The Ford Foundation's art collection that was amassed in the 60s and 70s was about 400 works of dead European artists, all male. I would say there were maybe 4 women artists represented in the collection. So if the building is going to speak to who we are and how we work today, the art collection has to do the same. So following AMA guidelines, we deaccessioned the collection, and using the proceeds from the sales of the old collection, we made a new collection. So it's not grant money, it's not operational costs, it was 1-for-1. The proceeds we had from selling art is what we used to buy new art. So now we have about 350 works in the current collection that is much more representative of the world. We are not a collecting institution, we're not continuing to buy. This was just a one-time deal, and we're fortunate that we get to live with this collection and that people who visit the building get to see it. That was longer than I intended, but that's the renovation. So it is about our physical space and the art that we hang on the walls, really speaking to our values and showcasing the diversity and beauty in the world.
I know Rose has shown there, since you're not a collecting institution, I'm assuming you don't have one of her pieces.
Sadly,
No.
we do not.
Maybe there could be one on loan.
We'll talk later.
Joyce and Rose, you are artists who are truth seekers. Can you talk to how your work, and you've mentioned it a bit already, but how your work has really been applied to accessing social good?
Rose?
Okay. What is truth? That's so funny. In my second master's in creative nonfiction, that's a huge subject. What is truth? What I found, I actually went to do my second master's degree because I was looking for a specific text that defined indigenous aesthetics when I wrote my master's at RISD. And I didn't find anything that I felt talked about indigenous aesthetics further than like Baudrillard's relational aesthetics of the everyday. And so I went and got a second master's intentionally to write a scholarly text on indigenous aesthetics for future students like myself who want to study it. And in doing so, I co-led a seminar with my brother who runs the Indigenous Liberal Studies program at the Institute of American Indian Arts on indigenous aesthetics. And I realized that we can't talk about indigenous aesthetics in the language of the colonizer. So if you're using Foucault and Kant to talk about aesthetics from an indigenous perspective, it won't work. And so I had to deconstruct my entire process. And so what I realized was that my story, my lived experience is actually the closest thing to representing a perspective, because it is about a lived experience. It is about our own processes of self-awareness. And so my work is all very personal and reflecting my own truth as close as I can get it. And I don't even know if I know my truth. And so I can't tell anyone else's truth, that's for sure. But the only thing I can do is talk about my own process, and hopefully through my own investigation into myself and my own story and what makes up my belief systems and the reasons behind the things that I do, that I can somehow influence others to do that internal work for themselves. And that when they see my own vulnerability and my own truth seeking, that they look for theirs. And, you know, like we've talked about, it's not always pretty. And when I look for my truth, it isn't always what I wanted it to be. It sometimes is really hard and ugly and difficult. And, you know, as brave as I can be with that, I hope to sort of influence others to be brave into their own spelunking into themselves, right? And I think that if we are to make, you know, lasting social change, that we have to build our muscle of awareness and listening. And if we can't listen to the depths of ourselves and listen to the hard truths within ourselves, how are we ever going to listen to anyone else? Because I feel like when we learn, you know, our own icky, sticky humanity, we're going to figure out, and we'll have more space and acceptance for others. And I honestly feel like the root of white supremacy and colonization has a lot to do with denial of that kind of specific work. And we can look back all the way to Rome and things like that. And the influence that mannerism of external control in order to navigate those difficult internal spaces that, you know, like what Joyce was saying, there's art everywhere all the time. And I think that's what Indigenous aesthetics is that art is never, ever, you know, just delegated to museum spaces. It's everything that you do. It's how you walk through the day. It's how you pour yourself a glass of water first thing in the morning. And that when we re-empower those spaces, then we take away the power that has been controlling that expression. And I think that's where we begin to re-empower people who have been, you know, colonized and had to deal with genocide and slavery, enslavement, that we can re-empower ourselves and make really lasting change.
Joyce?
Hope that answers.
What she said.
What she said?
What
Ditto.
she said.
Okay.
But I will add something on to that. And I mean, you know, people talk about getting older. And when I was 70, I thought I would say something, but I did. When I turned 72, I was like, I'm gonna die. Things became clearer to me in ways that they hadn't before. But the one thing that's always been in my life that I got from my parents were sharecroppers, that I got from that. They knew their grandparents were slaves. It's one of those kind of like old enough to have that intergenerational history. They're two like things. One is, why else am I here? I don't believe I'm just here on this earth to look good and to do some nice shit. I'm here to help change. That's why I'm breathing. That's why that's why I have this. That's why I'm here. And so I must propel myself as much as I can. And you know, I'm human, so I'm silly. I'd rather sit around, and I love cinnamon rolls and like a maca, you know, green. I like to sit around that and I watch my stories. I like to watch TV. But through all of that, I'm always pushing myself because I don't know why else I'm alive. I don't understand life. I don't understand breathing. What is breathing? I don't understand this thing. But when I'm connecting and I'm making art and other people are doing ooh or really, then I know I'm on the right road, And my second thing is what my mom would tell me. And I believe that about all of us, but it's how we employ it. In the South, they used to say, don't you hide your light under a bushel. Don't hide your light under a bushel, because my mom had to hide her light under a bushel because she was dark-skinned, because she wasn't well-educated, because she was Black and living in South Carolina. She told me not to do that, to let my light shine. And people died so that I could do that. My parents ate shit so I could have sugar. So I believe it is my position on earth to shine. And I always tell people, if you can't cop a hit off this, how I'm sorry for you, because this glow is why we're here, and that's how I use it. That's how I employ it in my social activism, which I think, for me, many times is best served one-on-one with a mentee or assistant, or when I'm singing a song, or when I'm talking trash on stage, whatever. When yeah. And I think if somebody gets physically here, that would be it. Uh-oh, I got a whoops from that. There it is. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not the right whoops, is it?
There's enough light in you to light up Dodger Stadium.
Is that a fat joke? Did he just do a fat joke? Oh,
No.
Robin, you have had a lot of, I don't want to call them jobs, but experiences, from your own jewelry store to television anchor to your new 5x5 and an art director at Minneapolis St. Paul Airport, and probably 97 other jobs. How has the access to DEI been reflected or stymied or enhanced by that myriad of experiences?
Well, never stymied. I don't believe that no is a final answer for really anything that I do. I think I got 247 rejection letters before I became a reporter. So I don't believe in no. It's just persistence in trying to get to what is right. And I think that comes from parents that were really activists in the community and really believing that. And so I was always the little kid that if the teacher told us something, I raised my hand and said, no, that's not true. I just really believe that there's an alternative story in everything that we do. And I think that's reflected in journalism. Even that being a white male construct, you had to suffer being criticized in the Black community as well, because, this was something that was hurting the community, but you wedged your foot in the door to make sure that people could come behind you to tell a fuller story, a better story. And so I've always looked at that throughout my entire career. What stories are we not telling? What stories are stories that are really just meant to pacify a certain part of the community, make them think this schadenfreude that my life is so much better than this part of the community. I don't have to really pay attention to this part of the community. Or that certain ways that you reference neighborhoods and communities, North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, those are code words and switch words to let people know these are Black neighborhoods or Asian neighborhoods. Those are things that when you see this happening in your own place of business, that you work from the inside to try to correct. And so it's always been there. All those experiences have always led me from childhood to my first career in television. And really getting involved in Minnesota politics is I wanted to see how closely they resembled Chicago politics. In many ways that it does. It's a lot of knowing the community and knowing who's in the community. In Minnesota, it has been a wonderful experience because if your last name isn't Robinson, Nielsen, Olson, Swinson, if you didn't grow up in Frogtown, Powderhorn, if you didn't grow up knowing where South High School is, Washburn High School is, all those different things. Everybody in Minnesota is 1 degree of separation from everyone. And I'm sure that you find that in many communities. You had to know the community well. You had to know who the players were in the community to get things done. You had to know really peel back the onion skin layers of what a community is about. And so I took that with me everywhere I went. And when I got to the airport, I got to see it in art and design, in economics, and really expanding my ideas as to inclusion for everybody, and really trying to create a people's airport, a public airport that really embraced the community around it, not just the people who are flying and traveling through who have no concept of what Minnesota and the region is about, and who are the people in the region. But why aren't the people in the community coming to the airport to participate in what is happening in the community as well? You know, focusing only on Minnesota and regional artists and giving people opportunities through film, through dance, through visual arts to understand the diversity of what Minnesota has. We did, during the Super Bowl, did 10 days of diverse people, diverse music. We had Native drummers, Irish step dancers. We had Black fraternities come in and do step shows. We had cumbia dancers and teaching people in the airport how to salsa. We did visual displays that also worked really hard on trying to provide opportunities for people who were hard of hearing and visually impaired to be able to take part. We tried to do everything we possibly could to let people know that Minnesota was not flyover, as most people talked about, or the infamous Larry Craig bathroom that people like to make fun of. There are
I'm gonna break in right here because we're out of time.
So sorry, I can talk forever. But
that's not a problem with this series at all. We did have one question. It was directed to Lisa, and I don't know if you got it.
I just quickly answered it as best I could.
Thank you. This has been a wowza. Thank you all for participating. We have recorded it. We'll make sure to get that recording to not only all our participants, but there are several participants or people who couldn't be with us today, and we'll get one to each of you. Again, on behalf of the Plains Art Museum and the arts community in Fargo, Moorhead, and West Fargo, thank you very much for taking the time today to talk on a difficult topic. And there were certain times when the topic was going in directions which I wish we could have followed. We could have been here all day. Maybe that's something we think about, symposium. Rod, I don't know if you've got room on your curatorial calendar for work by Rose Simpson. Apparently she's not available till 2024.
I think I'm right behind Lisa.
And Joyce, absolute delight. I'm not sure that it was inappropriate not to drop that F word in this conversation. You had several other people who were going to back you up on it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
thank you. Stay well, stay safe, and stay in touch with each other.